A quiet but devastating storm is brewing across America's heartland. It's not a weather event, but an economic one, born from a bitter trade dispute with our closest neighbor. Today, on August 19, 2025, a new reality is setting in for farmers from the plains of North Dakota to the cornfields of Iowa. Canada, our long-standing trading partner, has enacted a new export law, unleashing a wave of retaliatory tariffs that are hitting U.S. agriculture with breathtaking force. This isn't just a political headline, it's a direct threat to the livelihoods of thousands of American families who work the land. The fallout is creating a full-blown crisis, turning fields of gold into fields of uncertainty and financial distress. This isn't a distant problem happening somewhere else. It is unfolding right here, right now, in the communities that form the backbone of our nation's food supply. The trade war, initiated with a series of U.S.-imposed tariffs, has now escalated into a costly back-and-forth that neither side seems poised to win. For the agricultural sector, the consequences are immediate and severe. Markets that took decades to build are vanishing overnight. The equipment needed to plant and harvest crops is suddenly more expensive. The delicate balance of cross-border commerce, which saw over $73 billion in agricultural trade between the U.S. and Canada in 2023 alone, is now dangerously unstable, threatening a vital economic relationship. The impact is being felt most acutely in a cluster of 7 states, whose economies are deeply intertwined with agriculture and Canadian trade. These states, North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, Minnesota, Nebraska, Illinois, and Kansas, are now on the front lines of this economic battle. Farmers in these regions are not just watching numbers on a stock ticker, they are living the consequences. They are seeing export orders for their grain, meat, and dairy products canceled. To understand the crisis unfolding across the American Farm Belt, it is essential to first understand the primary weapon being used, the tariff. In simple terms, a tariff is a tax imposed by a government on goods imported from another country. When the United States places a 25% tariff on a Canadian-made tractor, for example, that tractor suddenly costs a quarter more for an American farmer to purchase. However, this action rarely happens in a vacuum. When one country imposes tariffs, the targeted nation often responds with tariffs of its own, a move known as retaliation. This is precisely what has happened between the US and Canada. On March 4, 2025, the Canadian government implemented a 25% tariff on roughly $30 billion worth of American goods. Suddenly, American-grown corn, soybeans, pork, and dairy products became 25% more expensive for Canadian buyers. This immediately made U.S. farm products less competitive in one of our largest and most reliable export markets. A U.S. farmer now pays more for Canadian-made equipment, increasing their operational costs. At the same time, the retaliatory tariffs from Canada decreased demand for the farmers' crops, squeezing their income. This is the simple, brutal math of a trade war. The current trade crisis did not emerge from a vacuum. It was ignited by a deliberate U.S. policy decision. The first shot was fired when the United States administration imposed a sweeping 25% tariff on nearly all goods imported from Canada. Certain critical resources, like oil and energy, were hit with a smaller but still significant 10% tariff. This aggressive move was framed as a necessary step to rebalance trade and protect American industries. However, it effectively upended decades of relatively free and open commerce that had been the hallmark of the US-Canada relationship. This initial action sent a clear and disruptive signal across the border, setting the stage for the conflict to come. Canada's reaction was swift and decisive. Faced with these substantial new taxes on its exports, the Canadian government announced it would not stand idly by. It promised that its countermeasures would remain in place until the United States completely eliminated its tariffs on Canadian goods. On March 4, 2025, Ottawa made good on its promise, retaliating with 25% tariffs of its own on a carefully selected list of U.S. products totaling 30 billion Canadian dollars. One of the justifications used by U.S. officials centered on claims of unfair trade practices, particularly within Canada's dairy industry. The administration pointed to Canadian dairy tariffs that were said to be as high as 270%. However, these claims were misleading. In fact, in 2024, the U.S. successfully exported over $1.1 billion in dairy products to Canada, with none of it being subjected to those triple-digit tariffs, a detail often lost in the political rhetoric. The economic fallout from this trade war is not distributed evenly across the United States. A specific cluster of 7 states is bearing the heaviest burden, forming an epicenter of agricultural distress. These states are economic powerhouses of American farming. For these states, Canada is not just a foreign country, it is an essential economic partner. Consider North Dakota and South Dakota, where the border with Canada is not just a line on a map, but a daily reality for commerce. Farmers in the Dakotas have long relied on Canada as a primary market for their grains and livestock. As reported by farmers in the Dakotas, a state-of-the-art Canadian no-till drill that cost $1 million before the trade dispute now comes with an additional $250,000 price tag due to the 25% U.S. tariff. Further south, in the corn and soybean belts of Iowa, Illinois, and Minnesota, the story is much the same. These states are titans of agricultural production, and their business models are built on exporting a massive share of what they grow. With the imposition of a 25% Canadian tariff, American pork and corn are now significantly more expensive for Canadian importers, who are actively seeking alternative suppliers from countries like Brazil, or even within their own borders. The crisis extends into the plains of Nebraska and Kansas, states renowned for their beef and grain production. The integrated nature of the North American livestock market means that cattle and feed often cross the border multiple times before reaching the consumer's plate. For a cattle rancher in Nebraska, the cost of doing business has risen, while the value of their product on the international market has fallen. This squeeze is unsustainable, and it is forcing farmers across these 7 states to confront a future filled with unprecedented economic uncertainty and hardship. The abstract numbers of the trade war, billions of dollars in tariffs and trade flows, translate into tangible, everyday struggles for American farmers. The economic pain is not a distant concept, it is a daily reality reflected in canceled orders, mounting debt, and heartbreaking decisions. One of the most immediate impacts has been the sudden cancellation of export contracts. The financial strain is also acutely felt in the rising cost of essential equipment. American farmers, especially those in the northern states, have long relied on specialized Canadian machinery. This isn't a luxury item, it's a vital piece of equipment for sustainable and efficient farming. A farmer in North Dakota faces a grim choice: either absorb a $250,000 loss, which is honestly impossible for most, or forgo the upgrade, hurting their farm's productivity and long-term competitiveness. This financial squeeze is inevitably leading to layoffs and economic contraction in rural communities. When farms lose money, they stop spending. The economic pain radiates outward from the farm gate, affecting the entire ecosystem of small businesses that depend on a healthy agricultural sector. An equipment dealership in Iowa that specializes in both American and Canadian brands might have to lay off sales staff and mechanics because farmers can no longer afford the new tariffs on imported parts and machinery. Beyond the immediate financial losses, the trade war is eroding something far more valuable: market share that was built over generations. When Canadian buyers are forced to find new, more affordable suppliers for their corn, pork, or soybeans, they don't easily return once the dispute is over. The U.S. saw this happen with China, where it has yet to fully recover its market share for soybeans lost during the 2018 trade war. American farmers are now watching the same devastating process unfold with Canada, fearing that even if the tariffs are lifted tomorrow, the damage to their long-term market access may already be done. The most powerful illustration of this crisis comes directly from the people living it. Across the affected states, farmers and agricultural leaders are not mincing words. One industry leader, echoing the sentiment of many, stated that U.S. agriculture isn't merely nearing a crisis, it is in a full-blown crisis already. This is not an exaggeration for political effect. It is the lived reality for thousands who see their life's work threatened by forces beyond their control.
We sell our crops to them, and we buy our equipment from them. Now, we're being punished on both ends. They tax our drills and then they tax our wheat. How are we supposed to make a living?
This sentiment captures the deep frustration of being penalized by your own government's policies while simultaneously facing retaliation from your biggest customer. It feels like a betrayal, a profound disconnect between Washington's agenda and the realities of rural life. The anxiety is palpable. According to a recent survey by Purdue University and the CME Group, nearly half of all American farmers believe that a trade war leading to a significant decrease in agricultural exports is either likely or very likely.
I've weathered droughts, floods, and market swings, but this is different. This feels like the rules of the game have been changed overnight. We built our business on the promise of reliable trade. Tariffs break trust, and once that trust is gone, it's hard to get back.
These personal stories highlight the human cost of the trade dispute. It's about more than just economics. It's about the erosion of stability and hope. For many, farming is not just a job but an identity, a legacy passed down through generations. The current crisis threatens to break that chain. The voices from the fields are a desperate plea for a return to predictability and common sense. The consensus is clear. This path is unsustainable and is leading American agriculture toward a cliff. While farmers are on the front lines, the economic damage from the US-Canada trade war extends far beyond the farm gate, sending disruptive ripples across the entire North American economy. The two nations have one of the most deeply integrated supply chains in the world. A single product, like a car or a processed food item, might have components that cross the border multiple times during its manufacturing process. Tariffs act like roadblocks at every crossing, adding costs, causing delays, and forcing companies to rethink decades of logistical planning. Economists have warned that this significant disruption to North American supply chains will inevitably lead to higher prices for consumers on both sides of the border. The financial burden of this trade war is not confined to businesses, it is being passed directly to American households. Economic analyses project that the tariffs will reduce the purchasing power of the average American family by approximately $1,200 per year. The conflict is also causing immense harm to the Canadian economy, making it a lose-lose situation. As our largest trading partner and economically weakened Canada is not in the interest of the United States. The 2023 trade volume of over $73 billion in agriculture alone demonstrates how intertwined the two economies are. When that relationship is fractured, both nations suffer, undermining regional stability and prosperity in North America. Ultimately, the trade war is creating an environment of instability that chills investment and long-term planning. Businesses thrive on predictability. When the rules of trade can be rewritten overnight, companies become hesitant to invest in new factories, equipment, or hiring. This uncertainty is a drag on economic growth for both the US and Canada. The ripple effects are crushing for economies that have long relied on a steady and predictable exchange of goods, creating a shared crisis with no easy exit. Beyond the immediate economic losses, the trade war has inflicted a deeper, more enduring wound, a crisis of confidence. For generations, the US-Canada border was seen as a model of friendly and reliable commerce. The sudden imposition of tariffs has shattered that confidence. Canadian importers who once saw the US as their most reliable supplier are now forced to view it as an unpredictable partner, prompting a search for more stable markets. The 2018 trade war with China serves as a stark warning. The US spent decades cultivating China as its top buyer of soybeans. After tariffs were imposed, China turned to South America, and even after some trade normalization, the US has never fully regained its dominant market share. Farmers now watch in horror as this same devastating pattern repeats with Canada. The damage extends to the perception of the United States as a dependable global trading partner. As the crisis deepens, the question on every farmer's mind is, what happens next? The current trajectory is unsustainable. From the fields of Kansas to the halls of Washington, the call for a resolution is growing louder. Farmers and agricultural economists are largely in agreement on what needs to happen: a swift end to the tariff battle and a return to the negotiating table. The consensus is that trade disputes should be resolved through dialogue and established international channels, not through mutually destructive tariffs. The path forward requires a recognition that the US and Canadian economies are not adversaries, but deeply interconnected partners. The hope is that today's crisis can give way to a tomorrow where the US and Canada can once again stand as strong economic allies. Ultimately, the future of these 7 hard-hit states, and indeed much of American agriculture, hangs in the balance. The families who work the land are resilient, but they cannot withstand this economic siege indefinitely. They are looking for leadership that understands the real-world consequences of this trade war and has the courage to change course where goods flow freely across the border and where American farmers can get back to the business of feeding the nation and the world without the crippling burden of a trade war.